There's a moment that happens in every family, and you've probably lived it yourself. Someone's leaving after a visit, and you don't want them to go just yet. You linger in the doorway, you walk them to their car, and maybe stall with one more story. You hug and say, I love you, and then watch them drive away. And you don't think much of it. You assume that you're going to see them again in just a few days. You always do. But what if that hug was the last one? What if you could go back just for 5 seconds and hold on just a little tighter, a little longer? That was the moment Tracy Matheson lived through on the night of April 9th, 2017, a regular Sunday, a casual goodbye. Her daughter Molly pulling out of the driveway, waving and promising to text her later. Everything seemed fine. But by the next afternoon, that moment, one that they've shared 1,000 times, was frozen in time. The last time Tracy would ever get to see her daughter alive. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to my channel. And if you've never been here before, it's nice to finally meet you. And by the way, if you love true crime mysteries and you need an escape, I wanted to take a moment to introduce you to June's Journey. Now, I've talked about June's Journey before because I've been playing it for quite some time now. It's the perfect blend of a captivating murder mystery and hidden object puzzle solving. It's a free-to-download hidden object mobile game set in the glamorous 1920s. You play June Parker, an amateur detective on a mission to solve her sister's murder and uncover her family's hidden secrets. As you go through each beautifully crafted scene, you look and find key clues and move the story forward, unraveling the mystery even further. June's Journey has become my go-to way to unwind, especially after a long day of researching really heavy topics. Whether you're taking a break from work or you just need a fun mental challenge, June's Journey offers a quick escape and keeps your mind sharp. Each chapter brings another challenge. You can play by yourself, or you can join a club and take part in special competitions for in-game rewards. You can also decorate your very own island estate, and mine is coming along nicely, if I do say so myself. I've got 2 cute beagles that greet me every time. How adorable are they? And I can't wait for more of the limited edition holiday decorations. Now, it's free to download on Android, iOS, and PC. Just click the link in my description box or scan the QR code up on the screen to start solving mysteries today with June's Journey. And a huge thank you to June's Journey for sponsoring today's video. Partnerships like this one and your loyal viewership means so much to me and helps make these videos possible. Now let's get into a more heavy topic. It was Monday, April 10th, 2017, just a regular weekday in Fort Worth, Texas. At around 3:40 p.m., Molly Matheson's manager at Soma, the women's boutique where she worked, called her mom, Tracy. Molly hadn't shown up for her 1 p.m. shift. She wasn't answering her phone. She hadn't texted. She hadn't called in. Nothing. And that might not sound like a big deal at first because people get caught up, they oversleep, they forget to plug in their phones. But if you knew Molly, you would know it wasn't like her. Molly wasn't just punctual. She was the kind of person that would show up 15 minutes early, and she considered that on time every time. Her boss actually joked that Molly's idea of running late was actually arriving a full 10 minutes ahead of schedule. So when her mom, Tracy, got that call, something deep in her gut told her that this wasn't just a no-show. This was something wrong. 10 minutes later, Tracy was in her car heading towards her daughter's house. It was only a few blocks away and just a few minutes from her own house. She thought maybe Molly had overslept. Or maybe she just wasn't feeling well. But deep down, as she drove, she just kept feeling more worried. And that feeling got louder and louder. And as she pulled up to Molly's place and saw her car still parked out front, that's when everything started to unravel. And this is the story of what happened after that. The hours, the days, and actually the years that followed. And the horrific truth that would unfold. One that not only shattered an entire family, but exposed something even darker, a violent predator hiding in plain sight. But of course, to understand how all of this happened, we need to understand who Molly Matheson really was. Before all the news reports, before the courtrooms and the headlines that turned her name into a case file, Molly Matheson was just Molly before all that. She was born on May 18th of 1994, and she was the second child of David and Tracy Matheson. They already had a son, Nick, and if you ask him now, he would tell you that Molly didn't just arrive in the family. She showed up like she owned the place. She had this energy about her, this light that just pulled you in. Years later, when the family adopted two little boys from Korea, Max and Ben, it was Molly who stepped in like a second mother, not out of an obligation, but because that is who she was. She adored those boys. She was their protector, she was their playmate, their biggest fan. She helped take care of them without being asked, and she showed them off to all of her friends like a proud parent shows off baby pictures. She didn't see them as adopted siblings. They were her brothers, period. And although Molly was born in Fairfax, Virginia, she didn't grow up there. When she was just 3 years old, the family moved to Winter Park, Florida, just outside Orlando. Think tree-lined streets, quiet neighborhoods, the classic small town suburb vibe. That's where she became Molly. She went to Domerich Elementary School, then Maitland Middle School, and Winter Park High School, where she was a goalie on the lacrosse team. Lacrosse was something she picked up because her older brother Nick played lacrosse. And just like most younger siblings, she wasn't about to let her brother be the only one playing a sport. She was going to challenge him. But she wasn't just out there to play. She competed, and she was actually really good. And outside of school, Molly was deeply involved with the student ministry at First United Methodist Church. Her faith wasn't something she wore loudly, but it mattered to her. She volunteered at Vacation Bible School every summer, and she loved going on mission trips. It wasn't just about service, it was about connecting with other people. She wanted to help people. She wanted them to feel seen. And Andy Carty, Molly's youth pastor, remembered how she and a friend used to joke that they wanted to be famous, but they were too lazy to do anything about it, so they would fake it instead. They would post updates to their fans, well, their pretend fans, of course, on Facebook, acting like they were celebrities. And it wasn't just family or church or school. Molly was one of those people who made an impression everywhere that she went. Her brother described her as hilarious, outgoing, and just plain easy to be around. She didn't try to be perfect. She was unapologetically herself, which meant she was flawed. She could laugh at her own jokes, photobomb her friends' pictures, or belt out a ridiculous song mid-car ride and have everyone cracking up. Now, being in a household full of boys, well, Molly owned it. She was proud to be the only daughter, and she leaned into that status hard. There was actually a chalkboard in the Matheson kitchen where someone, David, her dad, once wrote, "Molly is my favorite," and he signed it, Dad. Molly never let him live that down. She would flash a grin and point to the board and say, "See, it's official, the favorite of the family." And honestly, he didn't deny it. If Molly wanted to go shopping, her dad took her. If she asked for one thing, she usually got two. He just had a hard time saying no to his only daughter. And the thing is, she didn't take advantage of that. She just had a way of making people want to say yes to her. Her relationship with her mom, Tracy, was just as special. They weren't just mother and daughter. They were truly best friends. Her mom said she called her best friend. Tracy would say that Molly gave her the best 22 years of her life. They weren't just close in that, okay, we get along kind of way. They enjoyed each other, genuinely. They would hang out, they would watch TV, they would go on vacation together. Even just something simple as running errands, they would make it fun. And if they were just absolutely doing nothing at all, they would still make it the best day because they were together. And she was amazing with kids. She was really amazing. I mean, Molly had this natural ability to make kids feel safe and feel loved. She babysat, she became a nanny, and it wasn't for the money. It was genuinely because she loved kids and they loved her right back. Parents would ask for her to come back, mostly because their kids would cry when Molly left. She wasn't just the fun babysitter with snacks and a movie. She was the one that made your kid feel like the most important person in the room. She was really goofy too. She did have a serious side, but she was mostly a lot of fun. Getting a normal photo of Molly was kind of impossible because she was always trying to do something ridiculous to make you laugh, either making a face, throwing up the peace sign, turning a family photo into a meme. She just loved being the center of attention, but not in the I need validation type of way. It was more like, I'm going to make you smile, even if it kills me or takes all day. She would use Snapchat daily, multiple times a day, back and forth with all of her friends. And speaking of her friendships, once Molly was in your life, she stayed in your life. She wasn't flaky. She didn't just disappear or not answer your calls. And if you were going through something, you would call Molly. Not because she would give you the perfect advice, not at all, but because she would tell you the truth. But not in the way where she made you feel like you were being judged. It was because she would make people feel seen. Even when they couldn't see the good in themselves, Molly could. She was also the one with the fashion sense in the family. I mean, being a girl, I guess that comes with the territory sometimes. But when it came to her cousins, She was their go-to for beauty tips, outfit opinions, skincare advice, whatever they needed. But it was mostly because they liked to spend time with Molly. She could be goofy one minute and she would be your stylist the next. But Molly also had this quiet side. As a little kid, she was really shy. The type of kid that wouldn't be able to order food at a restaurant. She wouldn't answer the door. She wouldn't talk to strangers. So it was an absolute shock to her older brother Nick when, during a visit to his college, she didn't just hang out with his friends, she was owning the room. He couldn't believe it because his shy baby sister, the one that could hardly make out a sentence in public, was somehow out charming him now. And in 2010, the family moved again, this time to Texas. Molly was now in her late teens. She was heading to University of Arkansas, and she was all in on being a Razorback, and that's where her world would expand. It was a time for growth and independence, and that's where she met Sutton Rhea, her future best friend, and instantly they clicked. Sutton said that Molly was a little weird, but in the best way. She had this sharp, funny, witty personality and a laugh that just stuck with you. And during her college years, Molly started growing into herself more, trying new things. She even got some tattoos, and not the random 2 o'clock in the morning kind of tattoos. These were ones that actually meant something to her. One of them was for her younger brothers. Just the word beloved. That one she didn't even want to tell her family about at first because it was private. It was personal. It was a reminder of who she was and how she wanted to feel about herself. It wasn't the kind of thing that she rushed to tell her family about, and one summer, while swimming with her brother Nick, he noticed one of her tattoos on her ribcage and immediately called it out and teased her about it. His sweet, well-behaved little sister had a tattoo, and she panicked. There was no way she wanted her parents to find out. She was an adult. That was her choice, but she thought about how her choices would affect those around her. And in 2015, she made another choice. She stepped away from school before her senior year of college. She needed a break. Arkansas had been good in some ways, but it was really hard in others. She needed a reset, so she moved home to Fort Worth, and she started putting the pieces of her life back together. She rented a cute little guest house behind a Tudor-style home on Waits Avenue, just 2 blocks from Texas Christian University campus, and only a few minutes from her parents' house. Though she lived close by, she wasn't actually a student at TCU. She was still figuring things out and taking classes at Tarrant Community College. She planned on transferring to Tarleton State for a degree in social work. Her little guest house was perfect. It was 600 square feet and spacious. It had its own little outdoor patio near a single French-style door that led right into the small guest space. It was private, through the driveway gate right off the main house. When you walked inside, and you'd enter right into a small sitting room. Then there was a bedroom next to that through a sliding door. It had its own full kitchen and a dining room table and, of course, a bathroom. It was just enough space for everything she needed. It even had a pool in the backyard and a cozy veranda. At this point, she was also working part-time at Soma Intimates, a women's lingerie store in University Park Village, sort of like a Victoria's Secrets. And listen, her boss, her manager at the store, Carissa Vera, straight up said that Molly was a dream employee. She was polished, personable, reliable, always early, not just on time, but early. Like I said before, Molly's version of running late meant showing up 15 minutes ahead of her schedule, and she never needed reminding and always had a smile. Customers loved her. Her coworkers loved her. She just had that energy about her, and she found her rhythm for the time being. And by 2017, Molly was 22, living alone, but deeply rooted with her family, and she was in a great place in her life. She was happy. She was studying what she loved, hanging out with friends on a regular basis, and she couldn't wait to become a social worker. It's something she would talk about nonstop. She had a passion for helping troubled teenagers. She and her mom, Tracy, were still best friends. They would still watch TV, go out to eat, spending a lot of time together. And her dad was still the one with a soft spot for her. She was close with all of her brothers. She was doing all the work to become the person that she wanted to be. Molly, like other young adults in 2017, also had an active social media presence. And her guy friend, Peyton Bailey, would talk to her all the time on Instagram and Snapchat, exchanging pictures and messages back and forth on a daily basis. Their friendship was full of laughs, going on motorcycle rides together, and in Peyton's words, just being crazy and stupid together. They would wear oversized glasses and floppy hats, strike a pose, and pretend that the paparazzi was following them. They would say things like, "Oh, no photos, please. Respect celebrities' privacy." And people would look at them and wonder, who are these people? Molly also tweeted a lot of things like funny memes and just silly things. She was always online. But then things went dark. Sunday, April 9th of 2017 didn't feel like a big deal. It was just another casual Sunday in Fort Worth. Molly did what she did often. She stopped by her parents' house. Tracy and David were there, like always. They laughed, they caught up, they sat around and talked like they always did. These weren't special plans. They didn't need to be. Molly came over several times a week. That was just her rhythm, her routine. They probably didn't even realize how much that time mattered until later. Molly had a paper due and she had work the next day at Soma. So eventually she got up to head out, and before leaving, she hugged everyone goodbye. Her usual, I love you. And then she got ready to walk out the door. Her parents actually walked her to her car, something they always did. And then she drove off. And that was it. Just another goodbye. No one thought it would be their last. That next day, on Monday, April 10th, it started like any other until it didn't. At 3:40 p.m., Tracy got the phone call from Carissa Vera, Molly's manager at Soma. Carissa wasn't calling to chat. She was calling because she was worried. That's because Molly didn't show up for her 1 o'clock shift. She hadn't called in, she wasn't answering her phone, and that wasn't Molly. So when she didn't show up and no one could reach her, alarm bells started ringing. Tracy tried to brush it off at first. Maybe she was taking a nap. She did like a good afternoon nap. But something about it didn't sit well with her. It was mother's intuition, the quiet gut feeling that started to grow louder and louder. So that's when she decided she's just going to drive over to Molly's house and check to see what was going on. While she was on the way there, she's calling over and over again, and Molly is still not picking up. And as she's getting closer and closer, she's getting more and more worried. So Tracy called a friend of Molly's that lived right across the street. She asked her if she could just look outside the window and tell her, is Molly's car parked outside? The neighbor said, yeah, it's right outside, parked on the curb, which is where Molly usually parked. At this point, Tracy is a mix of worry, confusion, and fear. When she pulled up, she got out of her car and she literally ran up the driveway towards the back of that house. She knocked on the glass door and Molly didn't answer. Tracy was feeling more concerned, so she tried the door and it was unlocked. She twisted the knob and she opened it and stepped inside. Now, since this wasn't a big space, it didn't take long for Tracy to look around and realize Molly wasn't in the front room where the couch was. Her Apple Watch was still there on a side table, and one of her chargers was on the ottoman. Tracy turned to go into the kitchen, which was in order. Molly wasn't in there, so she ran straight to the bedroom. Now, it was a bit messy, but that wasn't unusual. There were clothes everywhere, all over the twin-size bed, the floor, scattered around on the dressers, some hung on a garment rack. Her curling iron and her hairspray was on the vanity. There was a broken full-size mirror in front of the vanity on the floor. Now, that did kind of look weird, but it was one of those cheap ones you would get at like Walmart and hang on the back of your door or just prop it up. And it looked like it had been there a while, since there was a small trash can on top of it and a towel. It was as though Molly had planned to throw it away but just hadn't gotten around to it yet. The laundry room was in order. Molly wasn't in there. And she had many purses, but the one that she normally wore recently, a gray one, was on the kitchen table, along with the key to her car, a notepad, a bag of change, some pens, her school ID, her driver's license, and her social security card. There were at least 3 prescription medication bottles in her house. 2 were on her dresser, and 1 was on the kitchen table. But there was still no sign of Molly. Tracy went outside in the courtyard and she yelled her name, but then she turned back to the guest house. There was one place she realized she hadn't looked: in the bathroom. Could Molly have been in the shower? And maybe she just hadn't heard her come inside. Or maybe she was hurt. Could she have slipped and fell and cracked her head open? That's a valid fear. It happened to one of my cousins, and it also happened to a YouTuber that some of you may know, Mikey. She had a channel here called Glam and Gore. So Tracy ran back inside and right into that small bathroom at the back of the guest house. And as soon as she pulled open the door, she found Molly. She was on the floor of her shower. The shower wasn't on, but Molly's hair was still wet, and she was wearing a t-shirt. It was kind of odd. Molly was just slumped over. She wasn't responsive, and Tracy was yelling her name. Tracy was in shock. She knew she needed help, but in that moment, she couldn't move, she couldn't think, and she couldn't even dial 911. She ran outside and she was yelling for someone to call the police. She needed an ambulance. She needed help. And then she realized she needed to do that. So she finally did. And honestly, you can hardly make out a word that was coming out of her mouth, and neither could the dispatcher. She was screaming, I need an ambulance. Tracy was back and forth between trying to be there for her daughter and still trying to figure out what happened and also being calm enough to relay what she was seeing to the dispatcher. She said, "My daughter is at the bottom of the shower and she's not moving. I can't tell if she's breathing. I don't know what's going on." Now, I will play a portion of this, and I just want to warn you, it's heartbreaking to listen to.
Let's start. What's your emergency? Ma'am, come back to the phone. Hey, are you still with me? Okay, tell me exactly what happened.
My daughter is in the bottom of a shower. She's not moving. I can't tell if she's breathing. I don't know what's going on.
The dispatcher had Tracy pull Molly out of the shower and begin CPR, but it was during this time that Tracy realized that Molly was dead. Her daughter was gone. She starts screaming to the dispatcher over and over again, like it's just some kind of nightmare, saying, "She's dead, she's dead, she's dead." The paramedics were already on their way, and so were officers. Tracy called her husband to tell him to come to Molly's as soon as he could. He could hardly make out what she was saying, but he left work and he rushed over there, and that drive to Molly's place was a blur. David couldn't tell you if it took 30 seconds or 30 minutes, he said. He had no memory of that drive, just the panic and the dread, the knowing that something terrible was waiting for him when he got there. To Tracy, it was unreal. She had just seen her healthy, vibrant daughter hours earlier, and now she's dead? How? By the time Molly's dad, David, arrived, emergency vehicles were already lining the streets. Their lights were flashing. Officers, paramedics. It was chaos. He found Tracy standing outside. She had already gotten confirmation. A medic had come outside and told her that Molly was deceased. And now she had to relay that news to her husband. These parents were in total shock. They spent the rest of the night trying to understand how this could have happened. Did she have some kind of underlying health condition that they didn't know about? They even considered that it could possibly have been self-harm, but that didn't line up with who Molly was. So they had to think of something else. If she did somehow do this, it was unintentional. It had to be. They were just running every scenario through their minds that they could think of. I mean, there were prescription bottles in her house. They didn't want to believe she could do something like this to herself, but they also had to be realistic. However, the truth would be way worse. Her friend Sutton was also finding out that something happened to her best friend, but not in the way that you would want or expect to. She had reached out to Molly that morning, just a quick, "Hey, how are you?" text, but she didn't get an answer. And then someone on Facebook actually messaged Sutton out of nowhere. And they just said, "I just heard what happened to Molly, and I am so incredibly sorry for your loss. Let me know if you need anything at all." And that is so heartbreaking. Sutton had no idea. But since the scene was so chaotic on that street outside the guest house, neighbors asked officers and paramedics. And of course, it was relayed to them somebody had died. People knew that Molly was the only one living in that guest house, so word traveled fast. I would wait to tell somebody like that. If they haven't posted anything, wait. You never want someone to find out that way, and you certainly don't want to let them know through a DM. It was the worst news that someone could get. Peyton didn't want to be alone, so he called over all their mutual friends, and it was more than a grieving session. It was actually a brainstorming session. They wanted answers, so they were putting their heads together to make it make sense. They went down a list of possibilities, and none of them added up. She wouldn't have harmed herself because she would have let someone know how she was feeling. Molly wasn't the type to keep things inside, so they thought. She must have fell and hit her head. At the same time, authorities were on the scene, and they were trying to answer that same question. What happened? When officers first arrived at Molly's house, they didn't walk into a clear-cut crime scene. There was no broken windows, no kicked-in doors, no overturned furniture or blood on the walls. This place looked lived in, but not as though a fatal struggle had occurred. However, the front door was unlocked, so you could file that under odd, unusual, not typical of Molly. But her television was still there, electronics untouched, her purse was right on the table, her phone charger was plugged in by the bed. Nothing appeared stolen. No obvious signs of forced entry, no visible trauma. But something wasn't right. The responding officer, Taylor Rogers, entered after getting a pretty nondescriptive call. It said a young woman was found unresponsive by her mother. It could have been anything, a medical emergency, a freak accident, a drug reaction. So at first, they didn't rush to conclusions. They did call in homicide detectives, but not because they thought this was a murder, but because they needed to rule it out if it could be. Detectives Matt Anderson and Kyle Sullivan were the ones who picked up this case, and like everybody else, their first questions leaned towards the possible and the tragic. Could Molly have suffered a sudden medical issue? Or maybe something self-inflicted? But her parents, Tracy and David, were clear. Molly didn't do illicit substances, and she'd been in a very good place emotionally. She had just had dinner with them the night before. She was making plans, living her life, laughing, so that didn't add up. The entire place was dusted for fingerprints, the entire bathroom, the shower, everywhere. As investigators combed through the small guest house, something finally caught their eye: the washing machine. Inside was a soaking wet load of laundry. Not just wet, it was soaked. The clothes were still stuck to the sides of the basin, like the cycle had been stopped midway through, or just recently finished. Okay, another odd detail. That alone wouldn't have been suspicious except for the fact that it was, because there with the towels, a washcloth, a pair of her shorts, and a pair of her underwear, and a fitted bedsheet, there was a pair of men's underwear. That last part is a major red flag, because there were no other men's clothing anywhere in her house. None. No guy lived with Molly, and as far as anyone else knew, she wasn't exclusively dating anyone. So whose underwear were these? Now, the fitted sheet and the washer also caught their attention because the matching flat sheet and pillowcases were still on Molly's bed. But the fitted one, the one that would have been around the mattress, it had been gone, and now they found it wet and bundled in the rest of the items in the laundry. So it didn't take long for them to realize this wasn't random laundry. This was evidence. This was a cleanup of some kind. That's the only way it made sense to them. Why only wash one fitted sheet, towels, and a random pair of underwear? Investigators started thinking that someone might have used that washing machine after Molly's death, maybe to get rid of bodily fluids, maybe to destroy evidence. But either way, this wasn't just an unexplained death. They were looking at a potential crime scene. And then came the biggest shift. When the medical examiner arrived on scene and began preparing Molly's body for transport, they noticed something subtle but significant: petechiae, tiny red dots around her eyes and face. And all of you are your own detectives. You're into forensics. You know what it means. It's a sign of asphyxiation, of strangulation, the kind of pressure that cuts off your oxygen. And just like that, everything changed. The guest house was now officially a crime scene. Officers secured it. They placed someone there by the door overnight. Nothing was going to be touched. Nothing was going to be missed. They were going to figure out who did this, because Molly was murdered. At the autopsy, the picture got even clearer and more horrifying. Molly Matheson had indeed been strangled. The medical examiner listed it as her official cause of death. There was also evidence of blunt force trauma, injuries to her head and her body that suggested that she had been physically attacked. And there was something else. The bottom half of her body was unclothed when she was found, and that opened up the possibility of her being forced into something. Detective Sullivan asked the medical examiner directly, was Molly violated? He used the R word, the one that YouTube doesn't like. They performed an essay forensics exam, and at that point, they didn't have conclusive results. No yes and no no, just we'll have to wait and see if the DNA comes back and we get a hit. But one thing was no longer a question. Someone had done this to Molly. Someone had been inside her home, and they had killed her. But who and why? On April 11, 2017, just one day after Molly had been found, detectives told Molly's father, David, what they learned: that she didn't die of natural causes. She didn't take her own life. She was murdered. David then had to do the impossible. He had to sit down with Tracy and the rest of his family and tell them. He took her and their oldest son into a room and delivered the news that no one should ever have to give. Tracy would later say that she screamed, and she may have even collapsed in that moment. She doesn't even remember. She can only remember the pain. The fact that this was a homicide, it changed everything. It wasn't just the grief of losing their daughter early in life. It was the trauma of knowing someone had chosen to hurt her, that she should have been alive, that someone had done this to her, and that hurts. Something I really admire about Molly's loved ones, especially her friends, was how diligent they were in fact finding. They were detectives. They got together, they formed a group, they were chatting on their phones in group chat, in a group together, brainstorming. They were scouring social media, making all kinds of connections and deductions, trying to find out who Molly corresponded with, who she hung out with beyond their friend group, and whether there were any potential suspects just lurking in her midst. They made lists, they checked people off, they provided these to police. And I give them so much credit and praise for doing that. With modern technology, we can start looking into things just like detectives would. And sure, they're going to go deeper with subpoenas and things like that. But in just a couple days, her friends already had a name for the police to look into: David Walton, one of the guys Molly had been hanging out with in the last few months. They reconnected recently and they were friends since high school. Her friends also knew about David. She'd been seeing him in the last few days leading up to her murder. So detectives looked into him. They asked him, "Who is Molly to you?" And he explained they were close. It wasn't anything serious. They were just having fun, casually hooking up. But he said that he spent April 9th with Molly. That's the same day she died. Once he told officers where they had been, they pulled up all the CCTV footage, and it showed the two of them at a grocery store earlier that day. Afterward, they played pool together. And then David said he left for work. He told the detectives that Molly had texted him on his way there, and he showed them the text. It read, "Have a good day at work. Love you." I mean, it could sound a little more serious than just fun, but maybe Molly tells people close to her that she loved them. They asked David what he did after work, and he said he went straight home and played video games online with his friends. But he still came down to the station and did a formal interview. And that's where he remembered something. Actually, someone that Molly had recently mentioned, a guy who was visiting from Arkansas. She met him when she was in college out there, and it was a guy named Ryan Peacock. David tells detectives that he thinks Ryan has a romantic interest in Molly. And now they're thinking, is this some kind of love triangle? Because that's a common theme when things go south and a person ends up losing their life. So now they need to look into this Ryan guy. When detectives finally got a hold of him and explained that Molly had been murdered, they expected him to be shocked or even sad. There wasn't even a sense of urgency. Ryan's response to them was, "I might be available to talk in about a month or 2 months." He couldn't talk to them right then? What did that mean? That's not the type of response detectives were looking for or used to. 2 months? No. Detective Kyle Sullivan was like, "Wait a minute, what? Someone you know has just been found dead under mysterious, violent circumstances, and you're penciling in a police interview like it's something like a dental cleaning." That was a red flag. Ryan eventually did agree to a phone interview. He told detectives that he and Molly had dated casually and it was nothing serious. He said he hadn't even been in touch with her recently and claimed that he had not been to her house in months. He did admit that they'd spoken on the phone that day, but he insisted he never saw her. And he had an explanation for the delay in responding. He was training for a management position at a restaurant. His new job was more important than the death of someone close to him, I guess. But the detectives took it all in. And by this time, detectives shifted into high gear. Every detail of Molly's life, the who, what, where, when, was now potential evidence. They needed to find her phone. And they looked, and they finally located it, tucked underneath her mattress. So they pulled it out, and that alone was strange because Molly wasn't the type to have to stash her phone like that. She lived on it. She would be texting, tweeting, snapping her best friend, Peyton. So detectives wondered, was it hidden there on purpose? And by who? Could Molly have hidden it in some kind of struggle so she could come back and dial 911 without the perpetrator knowing? When they got on that phone, it immediately gave them something to work with. Because on the night of April 9th, the same night that Molly was last seen alive, she had been texting with someone. Well, she'd been texting with a number of people, but there was a number that wasn't saved in her contacts. Just a string of digits. But the messages were very clear. She invited this person over to her house. First, they asked, "Are you around tonight?" And she responded with, "I'll be home later, check back then." Later came around, and Molly texted this person back. She said, "I'm home, you can come by now." They asked for her address, and she sent it. And later that night, they texted, "Be there soon." Then around 10:30 p.m., they said, "Here," and she responded, "I'll come get you." That tells us that Molly was awake, expecting someone, and willingly opening her door. The person then texted, "Lazy ass, I'm outside." Sounds like a casual text, not really flirtatious or romantic. The lazy-ass text seems too casual, maybe even like an acquaintance who jokes around a lot. Molly was known to be the kind of person who others could confide in, whether that was a coworker or a schoolmate. So it wasn't shocking that she would have somebody over even if it was close to 11 p.m. Even someone new that she wasn't that close with. She was nice to everyone. Then later that night at 11:37 p.m., Molly responded to a group text from one of her friends. They were setting up a day to meet up together, and they picked Thursday, to which Molly responded absolutely when they asked her if that date was good with her. So we know that she was still active on her phone, still talking, still alive. But then, at 2:59 a.m., that same unknown number that was not saved in her phone sent one last message, and it was never read. That was the last digital footprint on Molly's phone. So the next step was for detectives to figure out who this number belonged to. It wasn't Ryan Peacock, because they cross-checked it and his number was saved. It wasn't David, because he was also in Molly's contacts. Now, numbers that aren't saved are usually new. So that was another red flag. Had she met someone new, and had they come by that night, someone she didn't know that well that had plans to harm her? At this point, they used GPS data to find out where both Ryan and David's phones were. And they cross-checked that information with the text Molly sent and her phone GPS, which was at the guest house. And both David and Ryan were not nearby, so they were cleared for the time being. But Molly's friends had not stopped swapping theories, digging through Molly's social media, her old text messages, her old flings, trying to figure out who she'd been talking to, who might have been with her that night. Peyton described these moments as literal hell, scrolling and scrolling, desperate to find just the smallest clue that would lead them somewhere. With some unknown number, they wouldn't have much to go on. And police were back to that unsaved number, the one that texted Molly here, the one that had never been named, the one that texted again at 2:59 a.m., and whose text message was never read because Molly was dead. It said, "Hey, thanks again for the advice. It's nice seeing how far you've come. I'm proud of you, BREJ." I mean, it was like BREJ dot. It looked like a misspelling. I don't know, you tell me. I didn't know what that word meant. And then it said, "Hit me up when you get up." Detective Sullivan did what any investigator would do. He ran a reverse phone lookup through their law enforcement database, and instantly a name came back. 23-year-old Reginald Kimbrough. Who was this guy? Why was he not saved as a contact in Molly's phone? They needed to dig deeper, but they needed to pause because Molly's family had to say their last goodbyes to Molly. A celebration of life was held at McKinney Memorial Bible Church. Her obituary read, "Her infectious smile and wicked sense of humor brought immeasurable joy to each person she knew. She was a master at photobombing all of her families and friends, and likely many strangers' photos. It made it quite difficult to get a proper family photo because of her goofy expressions. Molly loved music and entertained her family on road trips with her interpretations of her favorite songs, complete with choreography. Molly was a devoted friend and remained in close contact with nearly every friend she ever had. She loved unconditionally and always saw the very best in people. She was authentic and not afraid to speak her mind. She was the person that people came to when they needed advice, a listening ear, or a birthday cake. And as a young girl, Molly might have been described as stubborn with more than a little sass. Her relationship with her parents was especially close, and they appreciated both her sass and her quirky sense of humor. She and her father competed to see who could be funnier, and often Molly was the one who laughed at his jokes. Molly's mother counted her as her best friend and often referred to Molly as her right hand. Molly was always willing to provide any and all assistance whenever it was needed, yet she never took herself too seriously, and spending any time at all with Molly was sure to brighten your day. Now that she was gone, it was all so unreal for those who loved her. But they also had information the investigators needed. Reggie Kimbrough. Who was he? Friends quickly told detectives that Reggie was just a guy Molly had matched with on Tinder back when she lived out in Arkansas for college. He actually graduated from Plano Senior High School in 2011 and joined the Navy shortly afterward. He didn't attend the University of Arkansas, but he was always over there visiting Fayetteville because one of his former high school friends was enrolled there. That friend happened to live in the same apartment complex as Molly and her roommate Megan Lewis at the time, just a building diagonally across from theirs. You know how Tinder works. If you're in the same proximity, you're going to match with the people nearby. And it was convenient because he was close to where Molly lived, so they connected. Anytime Reggie visited his friends, he and Molly would hang out. And soon they began seeing more and more of each other, and then they became more than friends. Things move kind of quickly, as relationships do when you're young, and Molly and Reggie were spending a lot of time together and they just clicked. Megan later recalled coming back from spring break one year to find that Reggie had more or less taken over the downstairs level of their 3-story townhouse that she and Molly shared. He was living with them. But the thing is, as many college relationships go, Molly and Reggie were more off than on. And in 2015, Molly and Reggie had recently ended whatever relationship they had. And Megan and Molly weren't close anymore because Molly moved back to Texas and the two roommates were no longer in regular contact. Now, I'm mentioning that part for a reason, because this is what investigators were being told. Friends were coming forward. People who knew them were telling them the whole story. And a few months later, in December of 2015, Megan Lewis, Molly's former roommate, who used to be close friends with her, well, she ran into Reggie while working a job in Fayetteville. She was going through a difficult breakup at the time, and although she had kind of been acquainted with Reggie through Molly, she never really got to know him because he was always with her friend. There wasn't really an interest there, but at this point, she felt like she was meeting him for the very first time, meeting someone entirely new. Up until then, he had been more of like a background presence in Megan's life. During that chance encounter, Reggie offered to take Megan out for dinner and ice cream to help get her mind off her breakup. Megan was hesitant because she knew that her former roommate, Molly, had dated him, but it had been a while. Molly and Reggie had both moved on. So eventually, Megan agreed. And that night, she vented about her recent breakup, and Reggie listened. After that, the two were spending more time together and eventually turned into a relationship. This didn't exactly go over well with Molly. It's not like she really had to ask her for permission, but you know how those things go. She had really enjoyed Reggie's company. They were very close. Things just didn't work out. She never expected her friend to go and date him. So confrontations occurred, and Reggie found out that she made comments to Megan. And then he asked her, "Are you comparing notes with your friend? Do you regret moving back to Texas?" Since that's what she did when she and Reggie broke up. And he even got kind of mean. He's like, "I told you your life would mean nothing without me." But you know how relationships go. They can be that way when you break up. But Molly's former friend Megan said that Reggie was someone that people were naturally drawn to. He was charismatic. He knew how to insert himself into your life and stay there. And when they first started talking, he told her that he'd been medically discharged from the Navy, but he didn't really go into further details. And Megan didn't press for more. Molly accepted that her former friend had fallen for her ex. It wasn't the best situation, but what was she going to do? She confided in her friends and even her mom about how the breakup hurt her. And she was sad. And she felt like she had to move back home for more opportunities and more support. And Reggie was kind of holding her back at the time. She hadn't been in the best headspace. Now things were different. 2 years changed a lot of things. She hadn't talked about Reggie in quite a long time. So why would they reconnect? Her friends were shocked, but he was from the area and he was back home visiting family. He willingly came down to talk to detectives Matt Anderson and Kyle Sullivan on April 14th of 2017. And when they asked him how he knew Molly, he admitted they dated casually back in Fayetteville, but it was nothing serious. He said they had a falling out, they didn't contact each other, but they recently started texting again. And he admitted, "Yes, I went to her apartment on April 9th. I arrived around 10:30 p.m., the same time that text message said, 'I'm here.' And he said Molly let him in. They smoked some marijuana, they watched Netflix, they talked, and she told him about her new boyfriend, about her new car, and about her brother taking her old car. She even mentioned her mom, and everything was friendly. The night, he was just passing through. He was on his way to Arkansas to visit his friends. He admitted he hadn't seen Molly in a while, but they had always had a connection. And that night, as they ended up just talking and hanging out, they started to kiss. But Reggie explained that Molly felt bad because she was seeing David, and she didn't want to complicate things. So they stopped. Reggie said that was fine with him. He used the bathroom and then he hit the road. He also said that when he heard about Molly's death, he was shocked. He said his ex-girlfriend, Megan Lewis, had called him and told him that Molly was gone, and he didn't understand it at first. Both Megan and the friend that Reggie was staying with encouraged him to contact the police since he had been with Molly the night before, but he said he didn't have a chance to yet. Detectives called him first. So detectives were listening. They were taking it all in, and he even provided a DNA sample and let them look through his phone. Then they asked him again, "What time did you leave?" He said that Molly walked him out to his car, and he thinks it was sometime around 1:30 a.m. Detectives also inquired about what kind of car Reggie drove, and it was a blue 2004 Buick Park Avenue. What they knew by then, though, was that ring camera footage had captured a car coming and going down Molly's street that night, and it matched the description of a Buick. The footage showed the car coming up around 10:25 p.m., approaching from the north and heading south towards Molly's house. That aligned with Reggie's account of his arrival. So far, so good. But further footage showed the same vehicle leaving that area at 2 a.m., 30 minutes later than Reggie had claimed. That discrepancy, even though it was small, was significant when you're dealing with a homicide investigation. I mean, I don't always look at my phone or a clock, so to say 1:30 instead of 2 a.m., I think that's something that we all could have done. And Reggie really didn't think it was that big of a deal. He didn't like the insinuation that they were thinking he was lying. The tone of the conversation shifted. The detectives didn't have anything else to go on. This man saw her that night, and he was texting her around the same time they think she was killed. That 30 minutes mattered to them, but Reggie got defensive. He felt like they were interrogating him. But that's their job. When asked if he'd be willing to take a polygraph exam, Reggie was like, "Wait a minute. No, dude, I'm done." And he abruptly changed his demeanor. He ended the conversation. He told them, "I didn't kill Molly," and that they were out of their fing minds. He wasn't talking anymore. He was then left in that room alone, and he's shaking his head back and forth. He's pacing and he's not happy. But he wasn't leaving yet because they still had his phone. But after they got what they needed from it, they let him go. They didn't have DNA results. They had no physical evidence tying him to Molly's murder. And even if they knew he lied about the 30 minutes, they couldn't hold him there. But he was their number one suspect. So they began doing a more intense background check. And it didn't take long for the picture to get even darker. The first red flag, an old SA case from 2014. South Padre Island, a very popular party area for college students. Detective Sullivan reached out to the department that handled that case and was stunned by what he learned. The survivor, who had allegedly been victimized by Reggie, was a 20-year-old named Katie Coates. Katie was on spring break, celebrating her birthday with friends. Thousands of college students hit South Padre at that time of the year for all of the parties, the beach, the clubs. Katie was just one of them, laughing and dancing and living her life. And that week she met Reggie. He was charming, attractive, nice big smile, outgoing, exactly the kind of guy that seemed to know everyone and everyone liked him. He fit right into the scene. And one night after going out, Katie and Reggie ended up at a hotel. They hung out by the pool, they had drinks, but then she recalled feeling more intoxicated than she should have been. And that's scary. At first, it could seem like, okay, maybe I had one too many, but it felt different. And she kind of downplayed it at first, thinking it wasn't that big of a deal. And she was already getting close with Reggie. They had kissed, and it was nothing out of the ordinary. Then she told him she needed to use the restroom, and he walked her to the women's bathroom like a gentleman would. But what happened next wasn't gentlemanlike, not at all. When she turned around, he closed the stall door behind her. He followed her inside, and the second their eyes locked, Katie said she felt something shift. He locked the stall, and he started becoming aggressive, and it wasn't soft or loving or anything gentle. It was forceful, and she resisted. And then he put his hands around her neck, began squeezing tighter and tighter. She couldn't move, and he forced himself on her. He slammed her to the ground. He choked her, and then he violated her, covered her mouth so she couldn't scream. She said it was like everything happened both fast, but also in slow motion at the same time, and she couldn't fight back. She said she just survived. And when it was over, she bolted. She ran for help. A hotel staff member found her and took her back to her room. Her friend saw the bruises on her neck. They told her, "You have to go to the hospital." And she did. She underwent a full exam to prove that she was not a willing participant. This was forceful. And eventually she went to the police. But like a lot of survivors, she hesitated. Part of her felt guilty. She didn't even know why. It wasn't her fault. But that's the thing about trauma. It can scramble your instincts. Your shame kicks in where your rage should be. And sometimes women will believe it is their fault. Did they lead him on? Did they get too close? She told her story. She gave a full statement. She explained his hands around her neck, the fear, the violence. And when the detective asked her if she wanted to press charges, that's when she hesitated again. She was scared. I mean, they had CCTV footage. It was clear that she was hysterically running from that bathroom, holding her top. Something happened in there. The detective looked at her in the eye and asked one question. Do you want this to happen to another girl? And that was it. In that moment, it clicked, and she pressed charges. Reginald Kimbrough was arrested. And when he was interviewed, he didn't deny the encounter happened. He just claimed it was consensual. The whole she wanted it. He was adamant they were hanging out all day, they were kissing, and they had sex. But it was fully consensual. It was only afterward that he said Katie felt regretful, and she left because she had a boyfriend. She didn't want him to find out. Despite all that, the bruises, her story, the DA declined to press charges against Reggie. That case never went to court. No trial, no jail time. In the end, it was just a story. A story of a college party gone wrong, mixed signals, and too much alcohol, which is a shame because Katie knew the truth. She never consented. But Katie wasn't the only one. While talking to South Padre police, Sullivan learned something else. There was a CODIS hit on Reggie from yet another case. This one in his hometown of Plano, Texas. This one dated back even further, to 2012, 5 years prior to Molly's case. The survivor's name was Melissa Whitten. She was just 18 years old at the time, a high school senior. She had been at the mall with her friends when she met Reggie, who worked at a surf shop. He flirted. She flirted back. They exchanged phone numbers. She was interested, at first, because then he invited her over to his place later that week, but he asked her to sneak through the window because his parents were home. Red flag, yes, but she went anyway. It was exciting. She's a teenager. It's not too out of the ordinary. I did it. I'm sure some of you did too. Not proud of it. But let's not judge too harshly. But what she wasn't expecting was that he quickly made advances. She told him no. And that's when he offered her $200 for her to use her mouth. Let's just put it that way. What? That was the final straw. She got up. She was done. But he didn't let her go. He wanted what he wanted. And Melissa described him as acting apologetic as he tried walking her to her car afterward. And they ended up walking to a nearby park to talk. And when she leaned in to give him a hug, thinking that everything was going to be okay, it wasn't. Melissa was trying to be polite, just trying to go home. But Reggie? He tackled her. He pinned her to the ground. He pulled down her pants, put his hands around her neck. And she later said she thought she was going to die. What kind of man does that? She thought she would never see her family again. And when he was done doing what he did to her that night, he forced her to get into her own car, and they drove around for hours. He eventually let her go. She ran into her house, screaming. Her parents called the police, and she went straight to the hospital, did a full exam, and then she gave a statement to Detective John Hoffman with the Plano Police Department. And this is where things take a devastating turn. Melissa explained later that the detective didn't believe her. He asked her questions like, "Did you want to be choked?" "Excuse me, sir?" What? What kind of question is that? And he was heavily relying on the fact that Reggie passed a polygraph. That alone cleared him when it's not even allowed in a court? This detective even told Melissa's father, if I was on the jury, I wouldn't believe her. Yikes. Eventually, worn down, humiliated, and exhausted, Melissa was forced to drop the charges. She didn't want to. She later said, it was hard, it was lonely, and it sucked. And here's the part that will make your stomach turn. Years later, that very same essay kit matched Reggie's through CODIS. The result came back 41 days before Molly Matheson was murdered. Wait, this is 2012? And it's just now coming back in 2017. I was a bit concerned about that, how much time went by, but that's because everything was adding up. It took that much time to tell that that girl's story had been true. But the case detective had it transferred. No one followed up, no one flagged it, and so Reggie walked free. Despite the lack of prosecution, the parallels between Melissa's case, Katie's case, the accounts were clear. Both women described being violently choked, both said they were forced, and both struggled to be believed. Could Reggie have done the same thing to Molly, but this time gone too far and killed her? If so, it made detectives think. Had these other cases been pursued? Had someone believed Melissa and Katie and it had gone to court? Would Molly still be alive? They wondered, were they looking at a serial predator who had slipped through the cracks of the system again and again? Now, Detective Sullivan, reviewing that case 5 years later, believed that there was probable cause to arrest Reggie based on Melissa's report. So after they had to let Reggie walk out of that Fort Worth interview room in April 2017, Sullivan contacted Detective Hoffman in Plano, the one that didn't believe the girl's story. He asked, "Is there any way we can pursue an arrest warrant tied to the 2012 attack?" The man said no. Despite this being the prime suspect of an active murder investigation, there was nothing Plano Police Department could do to arrest him. Wow. Or maybe they just didn't want to, but it was on to the next option. Before they took another step, Detective Sullivan and Anderson needed to pause. They needed to take stock. They had Reggie's name, they had Molly's timeline, and they had enough circumstantial pieces to know this wasn't random. But they also knew circumstantial wasn't enough. Not yet. Reggie had told them he left Molly's place around 1:30 a.m., but the surveillance footage didn't agree with that. It showed his car pulling away closer to 2 a.m., a 30-minute difference. I told you, it might not seem like a lot to most people, but to a homicide investigator, that half-an-hour gap, that screams cover up. And then came the washing machine. CSI had already flagged it. Inside was that wet load of laundry, Molly's fitted bedsheet, her Nike shorts, and her underwear, plus that one glaring outlier, the pair of men's underwear. The washer hadn't finished a cycle, the clothes still wet and stuck to the drum, and Reggie, during his interview, had casually described what Molly was wearing that night, a t-shirt and Nike shorts. That matched exactly what CSI found in the wash. And that's when Detective Sullivan got fixated on a new question. When exactly had the washer started? And that is a good question. I like when detectives make me think because, yeah, how could we know? Could we know? Because he thought if you could nail down that timestamp and place Reggie in her house at that moment, it would change everything. Why? Because he believed it was the killer who did that load of laundry, not Molly. Does Jodi Arias come to mind? It is for me. So what he did, I've never seen done in any cases that I've ever talked about. First, he reached out to the city to see if they could track down water usage down to the minute. What a great thing to be able to do, but he had no luck. The water heater outside of Molly's guest house was analog and only checked once a month, so that was a dead end. But what about electricity? That might be something. And again, great thinking on this detective's part. So Sullivan called Encore, which was the local electric provider, and he asked, "Did Molly's guest house have a smart meter?" Crossing his fingers that they're going to say yes, and it turns out it did. And smart meters record usage in 15-minute intervals. Bingo. Encore pulled the report. And there it was. From midnight to 1:30 a.m., everything looked normal. Low, consistent electric usage. But then, at exactly 1:45 a.m., there was a spike, a sharp one. Power usage nearly tripled, and it stayed elevated for a short burst before dropping again. That kind of bump wasn't caused by flipping on a light switch or turning on a TV. But Sullivan knew he needed proof, so he ran a little experiment. He found the same model washing machine. He started a load, and he watched what happened. And wouldn't you know it, the same exact spike pattern. That 1:45 surge, that was someone starting the washing machine in Molly's house. And if Reggie's car didn't pull away from Molly Street until 2 a.m., according to the CCTV footage, well, now detectives had something stronger than suspicion. They had a time-stamped attempt to destroy evidence. And they knew it wasn't Molly that did it. That was so smart. And by mid-April of 2017, detectives weren't just suspicious of Reggie, they were racing the clock. They had a gut feeling if they didn't move fast, another woman could die. And sadly, they were right. It was just hours after Reggie stormed out of that interview with Fort Worth police. He knew the walls were closing in, but he was still free, free to kill. And on that same day, Friday, April 14th of 2017, another woman went missing. Her name was Megan Gettram. She was 36 years old from Plano, Texas. Megan was one of those people that was adventurous, but also in a soft-spoken, curious kind of way. Her family described her as independent and thoughtful, someone who found joy in the little things in life. She had traveled through India with her grandparents, hiked the Guadalupe Mountains, even camped near Machu Picchu, always looking for the next path to wander, the next beautiful thing to take a picture of. Her brother Jeff called her predictable in the best way. She loved nature, yoga, and her cats, who she proudly called her fur babies, like many of us do. Megan worked in computer coding, but she valued time away from her screens. Her happy place was hiking solo, camera in hand, listening to the world around her. And that Friday, Megan texted her mom, Diana, about a restaurant they tried together. Her last message, sent around 8:45 p.m., said, "Yes, that's really neat. We should go back there." A simple moment, one you'd never imagine would be the last. Because after that, Megan vanished. She had gone for a walk at Arbor Hills Nature Preserve, a scenic wooded area in Plano. It was her regular trail, a routine, something she did to clear her head and to breathe and feel grounded, but she never came home. She missed her brother's birthday celebration that Sunday, and then she didn't show up for work on Monday. Red flags immediately went up. That wasn't Megan. Not at all. Sound familiar? Her brother Jeff checked her apartment. The lights were still on. A pile of clean laundry sat on the floor, folded and untouched, just like she left it. Everything looked like she had simply stepped out and never stepped back in. Jeff returned again early Tuesday morning and still nothing. And by noon, his family officially filed a missing persons report. At first, her mother, Diana, felt like police weren't taking it seriously. She told them Megan would never leave her cats alone, not for a night, not even for an hour. And once detectives realized who she was and how out of character the disappearance was for her, the tone shifted. Detective Aaron Benson was assigned to the case, and on Tuesday he entered Megan's apartment, her car still parked outside, just like Molly's had been, her keys and wallet still on the counter, just like Molly's, and her laptop untouched. There were no signs that she packed for a trip or had any plans to be gone. Nothing was missing. And again, it's so similar to Molly's case. But of course, this was almost an hour away. The cases were not being connected. Two different agencies. Surveillance footage from Megan's apartment complex showed her leaving alone around 7:30 p.m. Friday night. She looked calm, wearing a red and orange floral shirt, headed towards a preserve. Search teams then mobilized immediately. Canine units combed the trails, and helicopters with their thermal imaging flew overhead. But there was no trace of Megan. And then on Wednesday, a call came in. It was a tragic and heartbreaking call. A woman's body had been pulled from Lake Ray Hubbard, about 30 miles southeast of Plano. No identification, but she was still wearing that shirt, the same one Megan was last seen in on that video. And Detective Benson rushed to the Dallas County Medical Examiner's office. The fingerprints matched. It was Megan. Cause of death? Blunt force trauma to the face and neck, compression. Megan Guntram had been murdered. Megan's mom had to listen to it and take it in multiple times before she could even process it. Her brother Jeff said he felt hollow, like the sound of Megan's laugh, the one that was always more of a grin than a giggle, had just vanished and left a hole behind. How could this happen? The detectives kept digging. They needed to know what transpired in those final hours, how a solo walk turns to a violent death, a murder. And then, like a puzzle piece snapping into place, several overlapping reports came in. On the night Megan disappeared, a patrol officer had stopped a group of teens at Arbor Hills after hours, just a standard curfew check. But that's when the teens mentioned something weird. They said they encountered a guy earlier that evening, and he told them that he had lost his phone, but he was acting strange and nervous. And he kept looking around like he couldn't figure out if he wanted to ask for help or to run. He told them he was a student at the University of Texas, and the teens said he was a young black male, probably in his early 20s. And then that officer, after talking to the teens, noticed a car circling the lot. A blue Buick Park Avenue. Wow. That is not a common car either. And he ran the plates, and they came back to Reginald Kimbrough's father. And the driver? A match for the guy that the teenagers had described. Reggie. And when the Plano detectives realized that that man loitering in the park, circling the teens, spotted near the scene, was a prime suspect in a Fort Worth murder case, the puzzle wasn't just coming together. It was screaming, "It's him, Reggie." He wasn't just a serial SA offender. He was one murder away from being a serial killer. Shortly after Megan's body was discovered, the Plano detectives reached out to Detective Sullivan on Molly's case. They compared notes, the car, the behavior, the timeline, the location, and everything pointed to one man and one man only, Reggie Kimbrough. It's so unreal to me that someone could take the lives of two women back to back like that, as one of the cases was still being investigated. But perpetrators do escalate. He was known to attack women before putting his hands around their necks. And now he kept them there until they stopped breathing. Detectives in Fort Worth and Plano were now working together. They compared their surveillance footage, the phone data, the car registrations, and everything lined up. Reggie was in both places. He had been with Molly, and he had been seen near the preserve where Megan vanished and was found dead. It was enough. A warrant was issued for his arrest on April 26th of 2017. Police found him at his father's house in Plano. His bond was initially set at $500,000, but that was just the beginning, because the forensic evidence was about to blow everything wide open. DNA testing confirmed what detectives feared. Reggie's DNA was found in those samples from Molly's body. Her autopsy showed not just strangulation, but she had also been given a substance, GHB. You know what it's called, the date R-word drug. I can't say it here. And Reggie's DNA was all over the crime scene. On Molly, in the washing machine, on it, in the bathroom. And he tried to clean it all away. But forensic science didn't let him. And then came Megan. When DNA was processed from her body, it came back as a match to Reggie. Now he was hit with a mountain of legal weight, but it didn't stop there. In June of 2017, he was indicted for the 2014 attack of Katie Coates, the woman from South Padre Island, the one that reported him years earlier for attacking her in the bathroom stall. And in August, the investigators tied him to Megan's case. It was official. Capital offenses. And then more women came forward. Of course, when they're seeing his face in the news, new charges were filed in Collin County, connected to separate cases from 2014. At least 5 other women were identified as victims. Some had never reported it, and others had, but their cases went nowhere. I'm wondering, why didn't people follow up on these cases? Oh, it was transferred. It was never considered. It went into someone else's file. Like, these are people's lives. And 2 women are now dead. It's such a failure of our system. By early 2018, Reggie was facing more than just 2 capital murder charges. He was a serial predator, finally unmasked. And prosecutors said that at least 8 women were prepared to testify against him, and each had their own story. Each had survived an attack. Women that had to endure that moment and then the trauma that followed, and some had never been believed. And yet, they still came forward. Reggie's days of freedom were over, but it disgusts me that Megan and Molly would have been alive if this man had been behind bars. It's not speculation, it's a fact. Reggie had been attacking women for years, violently. And every time he got to walk away. Why? Also want to tell you about December 2017, when Reggie's ex-girlfriend Megan Lewis came forward. You remember Molly's former roommate? She spoke with Star Telegram about her past relationship with Reggie. And honestly, this might sound ignorant, and I don't mean it literally like I don't understand, so don't take it that way. But I don't understand how a man who can get into a relationship with an attractive, successful, smart, intelligent woman would turn around and also harm women just like them. And one that he dated. I can't reconcile it until I think about the fact that predators are built this way. They're predators. They go after their prey. They want to hunt. They want to overpower. They want to chase. They're evil. They're evil people. They like the thrill of not being able to get what they want and making someone have to comply. It has nothing to do with their ability to get into a relationship. And I have to keep reminding myself that because my mind doesn't work that way. I go into my lizard brain and I'm like, how can you clearly be able to be intimate with your girlfriend, but you also go out and attack people? Because what's the point? They want what they can have. That's why. But back to Megan Lewis. At the time, she was still processing the full scope of what her ex had done. During the relationship, she said that she never once saw him be violent. And now violence was associated with his name. She couldn't even reconcile it. So I don't feel bad for questioning things because even a person close to him is like, why? But in hindsight, she recognized the way that he could manipulate her emotionally. He had this loud, outgoing personality, someone that always came across as happy, but kind of obnoxious at times. He was always the life of the party, and even though he never physically hurt Megan, she did recall frequent emotional manipulation and arguments that would trigger him. And these fights were usually triggered because he couldn't stop talking to other women. And anytime Megan tried to confront him, he would gaslight her, he would berate her for believing things that weren't true, and making her question her own judgment. The only moment that raised any deeper concerns during their relationship was when Reggie actually casually mentioned that he was dealing with an accusation, that's what he called it, from 2014. According to him, it happened while him and his friend were on spring break in South Padre Island, and he told Megan he hooked up with a girl. They had consensual intimacy, that's what I'm going to call it, and then her boyfriend showed up. And now she was saying that he forced her. Megan said that Reggie didn't even seem shaken by any of this. If anything, he just dismissed it, treating it like it was something that had already been resolved. Megan said he gave her the impression he was working it out like it was some kind of deal with the person, but later claimed the charges had been dropped entirely. So it was like he was telling the truth, see nothing happened, she was crying wolf. But after Reggie was named as a suspect in Molly's murder, Megan cut off all communication with him. And as more and more allegations kept surfacing, she found herself thinking back to all the times that she had been with him. She couldn't shake the realization that she could have escaped being one of his victims, and that is terrifying. And in April of 2018, 1 year after Molly's death, Tracy and David stood inside McKinney Church and announced the creation of a nonprofit organization in their daughter's honor. They called it Project Beloved, the Molly Jane Mission. And the purpose of the organization was to make sure that survivors would no longer feel isolated, silenced, or doubted. With this organization, SA survivors will be able to come forward knowing that they were believed and be heard, and that proper action will be taken. And the name of it, Project Beloved, was inspired by that tattoo that Molly had gotten shortly before her death. A word her mother didn't even know she had inked on her body until she was already deceased. Recall that she didn't want her parents to know at the time, but they were curious about the meaning behind it. Tracy asked one of Molly's close friends, who explained the word held deep spiritual significance for Molly. It was a reminder to her that no matter what, she was beloved in God's eyes. And with that in mind, Tracy and David began raising money and formally launched the nonprofit with 3 initiatives. Beloved Bundles, which were care packages for survivors that were leaving those exams with nothing but paper scrubs. The bundles included t-shirts, clean undergarments, and toiletries, a small comfort during an overwhelming moment for so many women. Also, the second initiative was soft interview rooms, because no one should have to recount the most traumatic experience of their life in a cold clinical setting. They were working with law enforcement agencies to redesign these spaces into warm, compassionate environments. And then third, a scholarship in Molly's name for students pursuing social work, because that's what she wanted to do. She wanted to help people. She wanted to heal people. I sincerely want to make a donation in all of our names at some point, and it might not be much, but I do want to donate to causes like this. And if you feel inclined, I encourage you to do so as well. I will leave all that information below. But exactly 2 years to the day of Molly's murder, Tracy stood before Texas lawmakers and asked a powerful question. What can we do to prevent the deaths of other Texans? And that question became the foundation of her next step, supporting House Bill 3106, also known as Molly Jane's Law. This bill was to create a system that would help law enforcement identify patterns of SA-type violence and recognize serial offenders before they could harm again. And that law was passed. And that was a major victory, not only for Molly's family, but for every survivor in Texas whose case might now be taken more seriously. I know I mentioned all of that because I wanted you to hear it before I tell you what happened with this perpetrator. But on March 18th of 2022, after years of delays, including setbacks caused by COVID, Reggie took the coward's way out. No, not that one. He pleaded guilty, just like Brian Koberger. Molly Matheson's murder trial had been set to begin that month, with prosecutors prepared to pursue the death penalty against Reggie. But just about a week before jury selection, Reggie chose to plead guilty to avoid losing his own life when he took two people's lives. In exchange, he received multiple life sentences without the possibility of parole, same as Brian. They're too scared to face the facts. This hearing, this sentencing wasn't about Reggie. It was about the survivors, the women whose lives were shattered, the families, the victims who have waited so long for justice. Molly's family was there. Her parents, Tracy and David, had carried this grief for half a decade. And they walked through every part of this nightmare, from discovering her body to building a nonprofit in her honor, passing a law, and now they had the chance to speak directly to the man who took her life. David stood up first. He didn't even want to look at Reggie. He thanked the people who helped get them to this day, the detectives, the prosecutors, and most importantly, the survivors. He looked around the room and acknowledged the women who had reported Reggie before Molly, the ones who were ignored. You were not believed, he said. You were dismissed and abandoned by the very system that is supposed to help you. I hurt for each of you because I know you did everything you could to put this person behind bars. And then came Tracy Matheson, Molly's mother. She didn't offer forgiveness. She didn't say anything about mercy. Instead, she called out every single failure that allowed Reggie to keep going. She said, "This plea has nothing to do with leniency. You've done nothing to deserve it. You had accomplices along the way. They are responsible for growing you from a serial sex predator into a serial murderous rapist. And those accomplices had the privilege of hiding behind their jobs as police." End quote. That was a direct reference to the Plano detective who dismissed Melissa's case back in 2012. Tracy held that man accountable, even for her daughter's death. Because had that system held Reggie accountable, Megan and Molly would still be alive. And Megan's family sat quietly holding a framed photo of her, wearing her signature hiking boots. Her mother, Diana, stood up to speak, and she said she never met Reggie before that day, but his face had been haunting her for years. She said, "I'm not giving you any more of my time. Life is too short. When I walk out of here, I have mountains to climb, silly snacks to sample, and people who love me and are loved in return." And Megan's brother, Jeff, said losing Megan left a hole in their lives that would never close. And then came Katie Coates, the woman that Reggie attacked in South Padre Island. She waited nearly 8 years to face him in a courtroom. She told everyone how helpless and ashamed she had felt after being attacked, how alone she was when prosecutors dropped her case. And now, looking at the man who attacked her, sitting in a jumpsuit, shackled, with nowhere to hide, she felt her power return. "So, who is strong?" she asked him. "The man in the jumpsuit or us women who get to continue our lives?" That's pretty powerful. And there were other survivors there too. Some spoke. Others just sat there and watched with tears in their eyes, and each one had waited years to hear those words, guilty. Each one feared they would never be believed. But now the truth was acknowledged. Reggie said nothing. He just sat there emotionless, silent and cowardly. But the women in that courtroom weren't silent, and they never would be again. And when the sentencing ended, the courtroom emptied and Reggie was led away in shackles. His story, the one he tried so hard to control, was over. But Molly's story wasn't, because her family wasn't going to let it be. They still talk about her case. They still talk about her life and her legacy. Project Beloved. Her mother even got that tattoo on her wrist with that word, beloved, to honor Molly. But her story doesn't end there. It continues in videos like this one and the law that was passed. And that law actually worked. In June of 2020, during a narcotics bust in Tyler, Texas, investigators seized a man's phone and they found videos of him violating a woman. And under that new law, Molly's law, the details were uploaded to the state's database and then to VICAP. the FBI's Violent Criminal Apprehension Program, and that match led to the arrest and conviction of Jesse D. Ray, a serial predator. His case became the first confirmed arrest thanks to Molly Jane's Law. A young woman was saved that day, and a predator was finally stopped. That is Molly's legacy. It's not just about how she was taken, it's about what she left behind. Tracy and David now travel. They speak about survival advocacy, about law enforcement reform, and accountability. They're still grieving, but they're also building. They've taken the worst pain a parent can ever feel, and they turned it into something that might protect the next daughter, the next sister, or friend. And it's working. I do my part by doing what I can, by donating to causes like this, and also by telling these stories. And I want to thank you so very much for being here for Molly's story. Let's never forget her. And a huge thank you to June's Journey for sponsoring today's video. Just click the link in my description box or scan the QR code up on the screen to start solving mysteries today with June's Journey. Thank you so much. Bye.